I'm Arisa Ugu. Welcome to another episode of The Bridge. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I think a lot of Nigerians find very superstitious or controversial to discuss. Trust and wills. And in the studio today we have with us Mr. Fattah Kadiri. He's a senior trust advisor at ARM Trustees.
Thank you for having me here.
And we have a beauty entrepreneur, the founder of Utopia Beauty, Nnenna Okoye.
Thanks for having me.
Stay tuned for more, guys. On this episode of The Bridge, we're going to be discussing trusts and wills. I think in this part of the world, it's a very difficult topic to discuss, which is really sad because we hear this story time and time again. A man dies, he leaves his widow and kids some property, and then his brothers and sisters come and cut it all away and leaves the family, destitute. But no matter how many times we hear this story, people haven't still changed their behavior around trust and wills. If a woman asks her husband, "Oh, what are the assets that we have in case you die?" He's like, "Are you trying to kill me?" So today in the studio, we have two really interesting guests that are going to come from two different perspectives. We have Mr. Fattah Kadiri, who is going to talk to us from a trustee advisor point of view.
Thank you.
And we have Nnenna Okoye, who is a beauty entrepreneur and a mother of 3 kids. So she's going to talk to us about, her issues around trust and wills. So Nnenna, let's start with you.
Okay.
Any anxiety concerning trust and wills?
Yes, of course. As a mother of 3 kids, my biggest fear, I'm always like, if anything happens to me,
what happens to my kids?
What happens to my kids? Because yes, we want the best for our children. And it's even more real for me because my husband actually lost his dad when he was 5 years old, and all the plans that the dad had for them, obviously it couldn't really happen. So we're more conscious, of this situation, and we're like, what do we need to do?
What structures do we need to put in place?
Wills, trust, which is what, which is best for what. So it really, really, something that bothers me.
So how can you help us, Mr. Kadiri? What? First of all, maybe we should start with what a trust is and what a will is, because I think when people hear trust, they imagine, trust fund for rich people.
There's a bit of a misconception that trusts are only meant for rich people. And there's also that same misconception when it comes to wills. Most people, when you ask them, do you have a will in place, they would ask, what assets do I have that I'm going to be putting it out in a will? So, but the truth is that we all have responsibilities. Once you get to a certain age, you have dependents, and you want to, as much as possible, make sure that you leave enough to take care of them. Even if you leave enough to take care of them, it goes to no issue if they don't have access to those assets. So trusts and wills are mechanisms of estate planning through which you can ensure
protect
that whatever assets you have are used for your family. So the first question you asked was, what's a will?
What's a will?
Most people will know what a will is. A will is a document which someone, a testator, to use the legal expression, puts down his intentions of what he wants to happen to his assets after his demise. It doesn't take place. It doesn't become effective until he dies.
So just for the sake of the audience, what's the difference between a trust and a will? So
the seemingly opposite scenario is a trust. In a trust, a person moves assets to a third party and says, hold these assets for me. But don't hold these assets for yourself. You are holding it for the benefit of these people that I've told you about. And a trust is different from a will, because a will only takes action. It's only effective after death. But a trust can start working right here and now.
I hear that some people have living wills. So some people have things like, I have 5 different houses and I want this to go to all my different children. So they could be alive when they give.
So that's another estate planning tool. But the fact is that before that could happen, it's usually called the deed of gift. You actually have to give your children an get an agreement saying, I, Fatai Kadri, hereby give Fatai Kadri Jr. my property at so
address.
The problem with that, of course, is that Fatai Kadri Jr. becomes the owner of the property.
Okay.
So you could sell it.
Fine.
So you lose control of the property. But if you had put it in a trust, if you had moved those assets into a trust, the trustee would hold those assets, and based on your instructions, you could easily have said as well that when I pass on, move these assets to
my children.
And the trustee is duty bound to do that.
So basically, your trust gives you a little bit more control of your assets. More control,
more flexibility, better management, and it's compared to a will, it's much more seamless. Before a will can take effect, you have to get the grant of probate, and that could take anything from 3 months to a year or 2, and in some cases it takes 30 years to get it.
So first of all, I want to ask, what do you think the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to wills? Because I've heard of people having wills and then there's still lots of issues surrounding their the execution of those wills. So what mistakes do you think people make?
It could be quite complex. The kind of things that can make a will fail, or that can make the intentions of the testator, the person writing the will, fail, is they're quite various. So many that I can't talk about.
Give us a few tips.
A few examples is, who do you choose as your executor?
Okay.
So if every will has to have an executor, you're allowed to choose as many as 4 people. An executor is the person that carries out your intentions when you're not around. So imagine if I, as somebody in his early 30s, and I decide to pick somebody in his 40s or in his 50s.
What if they go before me?
What if they go before me? That's a problem. Or I decide to pick someone who is perhaps less affluent than I am, or who has a tendency to want to covert assets and things of that sort. That's a problem too. So we often advise people that you should appoint a corporation. So a corporation is non-personal.
More independent. There's no emotion.
There's no bias. There's nothing.
Because it's so interesting. I feel like a lot of people, when they put next of kin, you find men putting their brothers. You find
that's another thing that we should talk about. Most people have this misconception that when you put next of kin on the document, that means that's the person that will take the assets.
It just means they're your emergency, in case of emergency.
It just means in case we can't find you, who do we contact to find you?
That's really interesting. You know what I'd like to know? So Nana is, she's married, she's a young wife, she has 3 kids. What kind of estate planning tools would you recommend for somebody like her?
Okay, so Nana is still very young. I'm not saying she hasn't. She's still in the what we will call the accumulative stage. So compared to where Nana will be in 50, 60 years, when her children will come to their own, come on their own, she still has a lot of assets, I pray, that she will still acquire. So there's this part of estate planning that we talk about, life, human capital and lifetime financial assets. She still has a lot of future financial assets. So what you will say is that, yes, you should set up a trust for her children. It could be an educational trust. It could be
fees.
There will be some fees, not too massive. And most importantly, we would recommend that she has a life insurance package that is tied to that. Because the biggest risk for Nana's children right now is that if anything happens to her or her husband, and the way you can protect against that possibly happening is that you have a life insurance process that would, once anybody passes on, there's a big lump sum payments that come into the education trust and ensures that Nana's children's education are taken care of, their welfare is taken care of, and that even if there's a surplus at a certain age that has been stated by Nana, those children get that surplus amount and can live their lives fully.
What are you most worried about? When you think about I need to put a will in place, what are you most worried about? Because I think young people, like people our age, we don't really like thinking about that stuff, but I know that once you have even one dependent, you need a will. So what gives you the most?
To be honest, for now, it's more of like their education and just their well-being in general. Mostly education, because I want the best for them, regardless of whether I'm there or whether I'm not there. The schools that I would love them to go to, I would love them to go to those schools if I'm not there. So it's mostly education for me. That's really what.
So, like I said, a trust will be the perfect vehicle for that, because it allows Nena to put money away, so she could actually start saving by putting money in the trust.
So monthly, is it?
Monthly, and the trust will also earn income on the savings that you are putting in. And because it's a bit of a long-term project, when you are educating children, you're not educating them over 5 years or 2 years or 3 years. It's probably going to take place over 18 years or even more, depending on what type of courses they want to study. So it's a long-term plan, and we in the trust industry, particularly in AIM trustees, we have structures that we can put in place that can enable you to not only make those plans, but to actualize those plans by putting money aside on a regular basis.
Okay, that's interesting. So is it how would you really explain it? So let's say someone earns 150,000 naira a month and they want to put a trust in place for their kids. With ARM trustees, like, what's the minimum amount that you can set aside every month towards doing that?
So,
and does it earn? So it earns. What kind of interest does it earn, and what kind of things do you invest in to make sure that that portfolio grows?
Okay. So, your question. What I'll try to recommend is that you have a large enough portfolio to start with, that the fees will not decimate the portfolio itself. So your portfolio must be, at best, be trying to beat inflation or beating inflation. Inflation is quite high now, so it's not it's not a feasible objective. But you should, at least as much as possible, try to beat inflation, retain its value, and so for that to happen, it has to be much more than just, say, 10,000 or 5,000. We will say that you can start with any amount, but over time you can start building it up progressively.
So, but what's the minimum amount? So, because
I would
a lot of people
there's
you have to be a rich person to be talking about all this trust.
There's no written minimum anyway, so you can start off.
So I can just come to you with 20K and say, listen, I want to set up a trust, and I'll be putting this 20K.
If your objectives are tied to that, then yes, we can work something out.
But is that realistic?
To be realistic, I'll probably recommend you start at least with ₦1 million or more.
Oh, so $1 million a month? Sorry?
No, not $1 million a month.
Okay. But $1 million
startup fund. Then you can now start adding some
money
amounts to it on a monthly basis.
So
and we can advise you on, if your objective is for your first child to go to Harvard, we can advise you that, see, we're in 20 years time, we think Harvard has this sort of inflation for school fees. We look at what the dollar will be in 20 years time compared. It's an estimate. It's not,
because that was going to be my next question. How do you
it's an estimate. Then we can then say, okay, so this is how you can plan. This is how much you need to put aside every month to reach this objective.
Okay.
And then you ask the question about what type of investments do we place the funds in. As trustees, we have to be very, very prudent with the type of investment securities that we put money into. We act as fiduciaries, which in legal terms means I have to act as though the money is mine. I have to do everything.
So would you say you're quite conservative?
We have to be conservative. We have to ensure that capital is preserved.
So what kind of asset classes would you put it in?
So the usual suspects in this case will be money market instruments, federal government securities, things of that sort that would, of course, earn some income, but there's little risk of capital dilution.
Okay, that makes sense. Also, like, if Nana started, this trust with you, and let's say she was putting ₦1 million aside every year towards this trust for her first child, what kind of access would she have to it?
Okay, so it depends on, at inception, we would have had an understanding of what she wants to do. And the good thing about a trust is that you can structure it in any way you want. So Nena can decide that she wants access to it, or she could leave it as to let it achieve its true purpose, which is the education of a child. And she could say, I want to be so disciplined about this that even I don't want to have access to it. And some clients are like that. they don't even want to be able to touch it because they want to resist that temptation. So they will say, yes, this money must only be used for the education of my children. And in that situation, nothing else will happen except using that fund for the education or perhaps welfare of the child as well.
So do you find this an odd discussion to be having as a woman? Because it's usually men that are looked at to have these discussions about wills and trusts. Like, as an African woman, do you feel uncomfortable?
No, to be honest, I feel that things are changing, with the new millennials. Like, we've watched our parents go through stuff, we're smarter. So I don't feel uncomfortable. I think it's the reality, that stuff can happen. And if it happens, I want to be able to address it. So that's what it is. I don't feel uncomfortable personally speaking about it.
And to add to what she said, what we've often found is that more than just having just the man or the woman coming in to set up trust, what we sometimes see is that couples come together to set up this kind of trust and this kind of estate planning provisions to ensure that if anything happened to either of them or to both of them, their wealth and their assets will still be available to protect their children and take care of their children for the foreseeable future as well. And I think we've discussed a lot about trust, but I'd like to also say, yes, I work with AIM trustees. So trust is the main thing, is the main vehicle. And I think there's a saying that says, to the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But beyond just trust, there are other estate planning tools that you could use. For instance, Nena can decide that she and her husband, when your husband wants to buy property next, you can buy it jointly in both your names. When you buy it jointly in both your names, then there's a principle of survivorship. If anybody dies, the other person becomes the full owner. There's also, you can also use that with joint accounts as well. It ensures that everybody has access to accounts. There's also deed of gifts, what I've mentioned earlier, that you can
give to your children,
things to your children. And a big tool that you could also use are corporations, companies. If you are very conversant with how people purchase real estate, purchase assets these days, it's very unlikely that you'll find people using their own name. So they'll probably use a corporation. And corporations are very, very good tools for moving assets from one generation to the other. I'll give you an example. The richest family in the world, Sam Walton, when he started his company, I think in 1956 in Arkansas, instead of him holding all the shares to Walmart, he decided that each of his children should own 20% each. So if anything happened to him, his children are still the owners of the business. Together. So you can use that same principle when it comes to holding assets and holding your family assets over generations as well.
Okay, so I read this funny story on Bella Naija like the other week about this guy who, his dad was quite well off, but the dad was ill and then brought him into the business. But he couldn't run the business properly. He admitted that he was basically running it down. And when the father dies, his mother, sets him aside and says, let's go and meet the lawyer and make sure that you are in the will, because the father had remarried, had other children, and a new wife. And basically they cut all of those ones out of the will and had this, big plan of how him and his mother were going to take over his father's property and all of that. What was interesting was apparently he travels to China, and in the middle of him being in China, his own mother basically cuts him out. I mean, he comes back, he can't even drive into the lawyer's office because the lawyer and his mother, they had done all kinds of things, forged, signatures. And I was thinking, wow, can this really happen in a situation where the guy actually wrote a will? So how do you protect, your family against, stories like that?
Okay, so with respect to ARM trustees, one of the things that we do is that we try to make sure that the wills we write for people are as watertight as possible. Okay. Some of those provisions in ensuring that they are watertight is to have as many who will be there to witness the person executing the will. Sometimes we'll take pictures just to provide evidence that this person actually executed this will. And then sometimes you would also try to get a medical practitioner, because one of the ways in which you can vitiate a will is to say that the person was mentally unfit to write a will at that point in time. We'll also get a medical practitioner to also certify in the body of the will itself that the testator, which is the person writing the will, is of sound mind and is capable of writing the will. But beyond that, another way in which you can ensure that your assets are not tampered with in this kind of way is to, if you had created a trust in the first place, you've moved a lot of assets to the trust in the first place, you've seen it work for some time, and some people are already aware of how it works. It's a lot more difficult for anybody to connive and then twist the way things are going to work going forward.
It's actually quite interesting. You were saying a lot about putting a lot of your assets in the name of a corporation, so that way it kind of protects your children. But I was thinking about the other way, because in my book, The Smart Money Woman, there's a chapter that talks about, estate planning and wills and stuff. So basically, one of the characters, her family's livelihood was basically dependent on her father-in-law's wealth. And then he dies, and they find out that they're in financial ruin because all of his money was in his company and he was in a lot of debt. So in a situation like that, does it protect, are the trusts that you put in place, exempt from, say, bankruptcy, or can the people that you owe money come and make a claim to those trusts?
Okay, so if you move assets into a trust, and you move those assets into a trust without a criminal intention or without the intention of hiding from your creditors, then those assets are different from your own assets. When you move the assets into the trust, they are no longer your property.
Okay.
So in legal terms, nobody can actually come after the assets that are in the trust. So a trust is good for that. It's an asset. It's good for asset protection. And you often find, in most cases, a lot of people that are really rich have built businesses, and they often act as personal guarantors to the debts of those businesses. If things go wrong, that means their own personal estates will be depleted, paying for the debt of the business. However, if you've moved your personal assets into a trust beforehand, and not for the purpose of
criminal activity,
not for the purpose of hiding from creditors, because if you do that because you want to hide from creditors, it will be declared a sham trust and the assets will be retrieved. But if you have done it even before then the assets are protected, and at best the only way that the creditors can get from you is when that trust is paying you maybe some income. That's the only thing that they can get at all.
That's very interesting to know.
It's absolutely good for asset protection as well.
Yeah.
So if you had a will, for example, and you had 3 kids and there are only 2, you put 2 of your kids, and there's a dependent that actually needs it, but that person is not on the will if something happened to you before you had to put that child on the will, like what happens in that situation?
Okay, so what would happen is depends on where you're writing the will. If you're writing the will in Lagos State and it's a will that is lodged in Lagos State, that means the provisions of the Lagos State Wills Act would apply, which means that you must provide for all your dependents. So
you can't just cut people out.
You can't just cut people out without explanation. If you do explain and say, maybe this child has
child's a bad child, I'm giving him enough of my wealth.
Yeah, then you can cut people. But otherwise, what the courts will do, if the matter does come to court, is that the court will make it necessary for the estate to provide for that dependent that wasn't provided for. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does.
Thank you so much. This was such a great discussion. I had a great time listening to you.
Thank you very much.
Definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yes. Definitely. Well, I guess at the end of the day, what I got from this is it's best to do a mixture of both, like a trust and a will. If you want to cover everything. So
I think there's a Chinese proverb, I think, that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The next best time is now.
Yeah.
So most people always postpone it. They say, no, I'll do it in 10 years time. I'll do it when I have more money.
More money.
Actually, you should start doing it now.
Taking action now.
Start doing things now. The next time you're buying a property, buy it in the name of a corporation. The next time you're thinking of putting money aside, put it aside through a trust so that everything is protected. So that's the whole idea. Start now and start acting.
Start now, guys. Thank you so much for watching another episode of The Bridge. And a big thank you to our guests, Mr. Fatai Kadiri from ARM Trustees.
Thank you very much, Iris.
And Nana Okoye from Utopia Beauty.
Thank you very much for having us here.
Let's continue this conversation on social media. You can follow me on @SmartMoneyArisa. See you next time.